What if I told you that in 1975, a miracle happened? Today we tell the story of Laura Pentas and her battle with a deadly illness. How did Laura and her family overcome this challenge? Our tale begins in a small town called Southington, Connecticut, where the Carpenter family lived their daily lives happily. This is LIveStrong, the Laura Pentas story.
It was a suburban neighborhood, like any, though the houses were smaller. They were ranches and colonials and Dutch colonials. And it was a nice neighborhood because there were a lot of kids growing up at the time. We played outside in the winter, in the summer, in the spring, in the fall. A lot of stuff going on in people's backyards, playing in the street. And there was woods behind our house too, so we played in the woods a lot too. We didn't have a whole lot, but we were happy.
She was a pain in the ass, but in a good way. We had a love-hate relationship. We were either best friends or we were killing each other. And it seemed like we were partners in crime. Being so close in age, we did everything together. We're only 15 months apart. Irish twins, so to speak.
She was a very energetic little girl, and there was really no reason to think there was anything wrong with her. She wasn't a sickly child at all. Very rarely got cold, if any. She had been complaining about a backache. She had just started taking gymnastics, and I thought, well, that was part of the problem. But it went on for a couple of weeks.
She used to get nosebleeds a lot, which was kind of funny. Her nose would just start to bleed. We never really knew what that was. But you never really think it could be something so dreadful as cancer.
We had gone grocery shopping and then went over to the doctor's office. It was a general practitioner, didn't have to make an appointment, went in.
And going into that cold, sterile office with the little old white-haired man on the cold metal table.
And he knew right away there were some large lymph nodes in her neck that he felt. He didn't know exactly what it was. He thought it might be leukemia. I was scared enough to think it was very serious. Sent us directly to the University of Connecticut Health Center, which was in Farmington, the next town over. It's surprising that 68 Chevy made it. The groceries were still in the trunk, and I was so nervous driving, and I couldn't find the darn hospital. I think I probably went off the wrong exit the first time, and just so scared, and I kept looking at her. She was in the back seat, standing up. This was before car seats or anything like that. She was standing in the back seat, and I kept looking at her through the rear view mirror and thinking she looked pale. Didn't I notice that she looked pale?
First saw the lump there at the Yukon Children's Hospital, and I remember thinking how we didn't notice it before because it was so obvious.
She was diagnosed that evening. She had stage 4, which is not a very good thing.
There was a lump, stage 4 lump, when diagnosed, and that it had spread into the lymph nodes, which was a sign that it had permeated itself throughout the body, and the only way to stop that was to take out the tumor and then kill any of the other cells which had spread themselves everywhere.
Laura was diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma. Neuroblastoma is a form of cancer that is commonly found in small children. Laura was more than likely born with it. Her tumor was in her chest and wrapped around her spine. Her chances of survival were very slim.
You know, as Remarque once said, words hold the horrors of the world, and that word held the horror of the word. Words like cancer and chemotherapy and radiation. These words were our reality. They were Laura's reality growing up.
Looking at you and offering some hope, but not knowing if the treatment that they currently had for the disease was going to help her.
Our lives didn't change per se, other than that suddenly our rounds in the car suddenly included not only going to the supermarket or to the shoe store, but to that hospital for treatments. In a way, it became a new normal, if that makes any sense. A terrible normal, but in a way, it kind of became normal.
There were a lot of visits to the hospital. Laura was on a chemotherapy regime, which meant she had to have drugs every 3 weeks, and she had When she started, there were 6 of them, and she had to stay in the hospital overnight. And not only that, but every other day we had to drive back to the hospital for her to have blood tests.
Waiting for the results of some blood tests and platelet counts and white counts, and all the kids I saw walking around with IV poles and emaciated and hair gone. They look like ghosts. And not too long after that, for many of them, they were ghosts.
We didn't realize how dire the situation was for Laura. We did not know that. She was very, very sick, and I think even at the time, you know that, but you know, death is a faraway thing when you're a child. And certainly we didn't think she was going to die.
I mean, there's some unbelievably painful things that this young girl was going through. I mean, bone marrow transplants where they're, going into your bone, and you're 6, 7 years old. It's incomprehensible, the pain involved in these procedures, or spinal taps, for God's sakes, on a little child, surgeries.
As a mother, not being able to do anything to stop this awful thing from happening to your child was the worst thing.
My parents were in their 20s. They were young and they were scared. They were trying to make it so that we weren't scared. But I don't know if they were any less terrified than we are. I do remember my mom breaking down from time to time and crying, but she tried to keep that from us. She tried to stay strong. My father was a cookie salesman, so he had to work, and I can imagine how heart-wrenching that must have been in today's world and profession. You just get some family leave or something, but he didn't have that option because he worked on commission, which means if he didn't sell cookies, then he didn't make any money. So that wasn't an option, and still maintain a steady paycheck. I can imagine the cost of health insurance must have been tough, and the payments that went along with it, and the pressure that it put on the family financially, not to mention emotionally.
Once the treatment started and they were working, as awful as they were, because she was getting some very toxic drugs, it was something that was going to hopefully help her. So for that, you're grateful.
She used to come back from radiation treatments and chemotherapy treatments where she was literally being burned with radiation, and she was being poisoned with chemotherapy, and her, her hair falling out, and her body I remember her skin brown and lifeless, and her being so worn out and tired and exhausted. She'd be laying on the couch, and I would come over really slowly because I didn't know what to do. Again, I wasn't much older than she was, and I was terrified. And she'd be laying there lifeless with her little blanket, her silky, her little yellow blanket that she carried around with her everywhere. And then her little arm would pop out and go like that. And she'd say, "Tickle my arm."
Tickle her arm. That's what I would do. She would put out her little arm, tickle my arm. And she'd have the little, from where the IVs were, it was so skinny and almost yellowy, because the medicine just changes your body. Her hair would fall out, of course, and that's what I would do, and get her stuffed animals.
And smile, and through all of that, still with that courage and that personality. Even in the pictures you see when she's wearing her hats because she had no hair, and she's always smiling with that goofy little smile she had.
Everybody was there for her. Her teacher she had at the time.
Laura was in the 1st grade, and I was in the 3rd grade. Laura's teacher, Miss Misha, I had her too. She might have had a different name when Laura had her. But I just remember she had these really long fingernails, and I used to think she was a witch, but she wasn't a witch, and if she was a good witch. The real witch was my teacher, Mrs. Horlowitz, which should have been Horlowitch. She was old. I thought she was about 300 years old when I had her. Go figure, she taught another 20 years, so I don't know if she sold her soul to Satan or what. I don't know, so I'm sure she was a wonderful person, but in terms of child psychology, that must have been a brand new, endeavor back then.
I was in, I believe, 6th grade at the time. I had very supportive classmates, unlike my brother, Chris.
I got into a lot of fights. I couldn't handle my emotion. God, I don't think there was a recess that went by. I just picked somebody out, and as soon as the bell rang, I'd run outside. I can still remember doing it. Running, tackling them, and just wailing until somebody pulled me off, and even then I couldn't control myself.
He's younger, so you have kids who might not understand. Maybe the teachers aren't as good as conveying what's going on.
And it's strange, the school environment, my class included, it's so ambivalent. The one day everybody's signing, get well cards, and then the next day they're making fun of her because she has no hair. And I don't think there was anything intentional in it, but, obviously I was already unstable emotionally as it was.
She would go to school and she would have the wig, and physically her face had changed. But that teacher was very good at getting across to Laura's classmates what was going on, at least at some elementary level, so that the kids didn't look at my sister like she was some kind of a freak. Because in some respects, she was being treated for this freakish disease that only a few children get. Thank God it's only a few.
I remember an incident where I just started freaking out and breaking up my crayons and throwing them across the classroom. And I just remember all the kids like screaming and ducking under their desks, and I must have ran out of crayon ammo or something, but I was still just like totally beside myself. I just wouldn't stop. And I remember the principal coming to the door, Mr. Ligori, and he's saying, "Chris, come on, Chris, let's go." And I wouldn't stop. I wouldn't get up, and grabbing me by the back of my chair and dragging me by the back of my chair, pulling me. I still remember him just pulling me, dragging me through the hallway to the principal's office. I got suspended in the 3rd grade from fighting. Who gets suspended in the 3rd grade from fighting?
Laura handled her chemotherapy and radiation very well. However, the tumor in her chest was proving to be an obstacle that the doctors could not conquer. She would not survive unless the tumor was removed. However, after one of her bone marrow tests, doctor found that the results were negative, meaning that the cancer was no longer spreading. They would be able to take the tumor out of her chest. Her operation would take place in Boston since the surgery was deemed illegal in Connecticut.
Originally, it was that the bone marrow was not negative, and that was why they couldn't operate on her. And a surgeon that was there came in and said that he was going to operate on her.
What was in her that was bound to kill her was coming out of her. That's what my mom wanted, and that's what was going to really make Laura well. So that was it. That was going to be the solution.
When she did go to Boston, when she had her operation, at the beginning we were gone for about 2 or 3 weeks, so that was difficult. But my parents lived close by and they were a very big support.
The chances of Laura surviving the operation were very slim, but she underwent the operation regardless.
I remember that day. It was in the winter. I can remember. I went to school. Chris and I went to school. And what else are you going to do? For siblings, you have to make it as non-traumatic as possible. So you kind of do the normal routine. It's funny. I remember being in the cafeteria and word getting to me that the operation had gone well.
So, can you tell me what it was like going through all the treatments?
It's hard to explain. I could tell you that on the drive to the hospital, I would get very nervous, and as soon as we walked into the hospital, I would throw up. I threw up a lot, so that was my concentration, trying not to throw up. So at night, I would shake my leg while I was sleeping to stop the feeling, and then I'd throw up and I'd feel better, and then it'd come again. It was just like a cycle.
I wasn't surprised. Of course, I was happy. But it's almost like I didn't expect otherwise. I didn't expect it not to go well. Now, my mother may have said that the chances of her ever coming out of that operation were slim. I don't even know that.
Amazing. I don't know. Maybe because she was younger and innocent and didn't know what was happening, that she didn't know just how near she was to losing her life and just what a miracle she really is. But there's no reason why she should not have died.
Is there a certain memory you have just going through the entire experience?
Probably the car ride there all the time. To get to the hospital, you had to drive up a long, circular thing. So the anticipation of what was going to happen, trying to get an IV in, and the medicine that they would push through my veins, I would get a certain smell that would make me nervous, and then just the whole anticipation of how I was going to feel after.
Later we found out there was a little mix-up with the bone marrows, and maybe the bone marrow wasn't negative, and maybe they wouldn't have operated on her. But as far as I'm concerned, if they hadn't taken the tumor out of her chest, I don't think she would have survived.
My brothers and my parents, they were there for everything. My brothers, their class would write me letters. When I would get home and have all the needle marks, my brother would tickle my arm. They would write me notes in the hospital. Their whole life changed because everything revolved around me, and never once did I even know it. They never acted that way. They just were there for me.
In fact, she was the first neuroblastoma patient that was on this protocol with all these drugs. And, well, a lot of the kids that were with her did not survive.
That's really what we're looking at here. It's about 40 years ago are a lot different to how they're treated now. And things like childhood cancer. You didn't turn on the television and see a commercial about donate to St. Jude's or to the Jimmy Fund. It wasn't as prevalent.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the doctors and the nurses that helped you?
I had a crush on my doctor, but there was this one nurse, Carlene, and I said, I want to grow up and be Carlene. One time, like I told you, I anticipated always the chemo and how sick I was going to be. So I think I was so busy trying not to throw up that I wasn't smiley and happy. And she said to me, what can I do to make you smile? She said, I'll stand on my head and spit nickels. And she didn't really spit the nickels, but she did a headstand for me, and that made me smile.
And the nurses who would care for the patients, just absolutely amazing. The torment and the torture they must have gone through every day, seeing kids so sick. I don't know how the nurses did it. I don't know how my mother did it. I don't know how people do it.
Dr. Altman and Carlene the nurse inspired Laura to also become a nurse, and she even worked at the same hospital she was treated at.
I honestly can't imagine a different job for me. I love my job. I loved working at the hospital I was treated at. I worked with the doctor, a couple of the nurses that were there for me, and I just know what a difference a nurse can make in your life when you're going through something. So I want to be that person. I really can't imagine another job for me.
She's amazing. It's funny looking back on it. Just, she always seemed like she was in a good mood. She always seemed like she was laughing.
Oh, it depends on the day. You can catch me on a good day, and I think of things that are happening, and I say, this is nothing. I could do this. I've done so much more. However, there's other days where the long-term side effects of the medicine and things I have cause limitations to things I'm currently trying to do. And it frustrates me that I can't keep up with other people. But in the long run, I am happy it happened to me because it made me who I am. It makes me value life, family, siblings. I think I have a different aspect on life than other people.
You know, we had good neighbors, and they came to an open house we would have every Easter after she had her operation. It was a way of giving back and saying thank you. It made you feel stronger that you had all these people behind you too.
But that's the miracle that she lived, because a lot of kids who were patients with her, who were diagnosed at about the time she was, and were on that floor with her, were getting treated with her, they didn't make it. So that's what always will, for all my days, that's what surprised me most, that she lived, because her body was put through sheer hell.
So what is the importance of the LiveStrong bracelet you have?
That is a constant reminder to me that sometimes I think things are a big deal that truly aren't a big deal. And I have that to remind me that what I went through, I could do anything.